and welcome to my final 31 Days of Halloween recap video. I again apologize for these being so late and doing them in November instead of October, but I'm also at least proud of myself for finishing them. Last year I was a couple recap videos behind by the time November came along, and I felt so weird uploading them in November that I decided not to bother, and I ended up deleting the videos that I had posted in October. So I'm proud of myself for not having done that this year. You know, you put enough work into something, you should stick it out. So that's my advice to anyone. Don't doubt yourself, stick with it. But anyway, today I am doing the final recap of the remaining films that I had watched. In case you didn't know, let me tell you now, I broke my record. This year I intended to watch 205 films during the 31 days of Halloween, which would break my record of 204 last year. I did indeed watch 205 films during October, and I managed to do so all by 2 a.m. on October 31st. So that means I managed to complete it a day early. I had a whole day left, which yes, I could have done a recap on that day, but I was tired and I was just like, screw that. But anyway, let's recap films number 180 to 205 in the 31 Days of Halloween challenge. Woo! Film 180 is Slither, a 2006 American science fiction body horror comedy film written and directed by James Gunn. The film depicts a small town in South Carolina that becomes invaded by a malevolent alien parasite. Slither is such a bonkers film, and it's funny how I've seen this a couple times and keep forgetting that I've seen it, so it almost always ends up a new experience. It's a crazy film, ton of fun, the wildness of the story never ceases, and the characters are hilarious. All in all, this film has great rewatchability, I've learned. Number 181 is Sorceress, also known as Temptress, a 1995 American fantasy horror film directed by Jim Wynorski from a screenplay by Mark Thomas McGee. An attorney is rising through the ranks at a prominent law firm due to his wife's black magic, but he will have to face a new case involving another sorceress who might make it hard for him. I can see why this has a cult following. It certainly has that cult appeal to it. I actually rather enjoyed it. Semi-interesting, easy to follow, sprinkled with a bit of cheese, and I do like me some cheese. I wish it had involved more black magic and less softcore porn though, to be honest, but I was more shocked at the fact there are 6 actresses in this film and every single one of them has breasts made of silicone. It's easy to see this when the film puts more emphasis on showing women's fake breasts than on black magic. Nevertheless, as weird as it is, I did enjoy it. Number 182, The Super, a 2017 American horror thriller film directed by Stephen Rick and written by John J. McLaughlin. A man becomes the superintendent of a large New York City apartment building where people mysteriously go missing. Began as an interesting film that most definitely went off the rails. Val Kilmer gives a crazy performance, but then his character is written that way. I figured out early on the true nature of his character, so I'm proud of myself for figuring out that at least one aspect of the story. As for the rest, there is a twist and a reveal, but it is so poorly explained and fleshed out that it prevents all the pieces from coming together. Basically, the film ends and I'm unsure how all of this came about and why and what is meant to happen now. I felt it's another case of having the right pieces but not putting them together the best way. Also, seeing as how Kilmer is not in it all that much, his name and face should not be on the poster at all. Number 183, Suspiria, some hard names I have to try to pronounce, a 2018 supernatural horror art film directed by Luca Guadagnino with a screenplay by David Cagna, whatever, I'm not even going to try. Inspired by the 1977 Italian film of the same name. It follows an American woman who enrolls at a prestigious dance academy in Berlin run by a coven of witches. I deeply regret having not watched this last year. This might be one of the single greatest pieces of cinema I have ever seen. I was captivated and wowed by this film. The original is a well-made classic and it has its pros, but this takes that story and amplifies it in ways I didn't think were possible. I'm always against remakes and reboots and reimaginings because they are never able to improve on the original body of work, but this is superior in every way. This film is written and filmed so meticulously, and to my surprise, I was able to follow the whole thing. I never felt lost, unsure maybe, but I didn't feel like I had to have all the answers. I typically don't like films filled with metaphorical imagery and unique camera shots, but somehow in terms of this film, the way each of those elements was brought together and used with the story and the dialogue, or even no dialogue, it all melded together in what I can only describe as sheer cinematic perfection. I felt like I was watching a 1970s film that was filmed in Berlin. This is probably the only modern day film I've seen to be set in another period and embody and embrace that period so much that it becomes impossible to recognize what year it actually comes from. The performances only enhance and carry what is an incredible and difficult script. Johnson and Swinton work exceptionally well off each other and on their own. The way they feed off each other through the whole film is astonishing. I don't believe anyone could have done it better. I am beyond amazed at what this film achieved and feel like every award should have been thrown at it. To take the original and turn it into this is just pure cinema mastery. Number 184, Talon Falls, a 2017 American horror film written and directed by Joshua Shreve. 4 teenagers on a road trip decide to take a detour and find themselves at a haunted house Halloween scream park deep in the woods of southern Kentucky. It's senseless, annoying, and boring. At least with something like the Hostel films, there is an actual plot about perverted rich bastards paying to torture people. This is a film about a bunch of fat rednecks. I say that because for some reason every single one was obese. I don't know why. Torturing people for fun, and they kind of hint at recording it and selling the footage, but it's not a plot line of the film. It's all about amusement, but there are no real characters. We don't know these characters or anything about them outside of their names. We feel nothing towards them, so who cares if they live or die? This film is just 1 hour of non-stop annoying screaming and sometimes a really annoyingly loud alarm going off that lasts for a solid 3 minutes numerous times. I wanted to punch someone. I zoned out and by the end was still able to follow because nothing had really happened. The thing I hated most in this, besides performances, was that one of the guys doing the torturing sharpens his knives by banging them together like a moron. I don't know what movie the people behind this have been watching, but that does not sharpen shit. It just puts dents in the blades, and he was meant to be sharpening them because he even demonstrates them being super sharp now. What the film is trying to demonstrate, and failing miserably, is someone using a honing rod or a steel, which is an item you'd use between knife users to keep the blade sharp, not 2 fucking knives. Number 185, Terrified, originally titled Aterrados, is a 2017 Spanish horror film written and directed by Demian Ragnar. When strange events occur in a neighborhood in Buenos Aires, a doctor specializing in the paranormal, her colleague, and an ex-police officer decide to investigate further. I really enjoyed the first half, but then the plot moved towards dimensions and interdimensional beings. It had a couple moments that made me jump or surprise me, but it all wore off quickly. Nothing gets answered, things happen, but there's not a point to them, and then it all just ends. So, great first half, not so great second half. Number 186, The Thing, a 1982 American science fiction horror film directed by John Carpenter with a screenplay by Bill Lancaster, is the first installment in his Apocalypse trilogy based on the 1938 novella Who Goes There by W. Campbell Jr. A research team in Antarctica is hunted by a shape-shifting alien that assumes the appearance of its victims. Brilliantly made and performed, fantastic special effects. I just didn't personally find it all that interesting. This is another film I've listened to people hype up for decades, and now that I've watched it, I don't feel it's worth the hype. I'd say it is when it comes to special effects, but outside of that, not really. Nothing about it kept me that engrossed in the film. Number 187, Prince of Darkness, a 1987 American supernatural horror film written and directed by John Carpenter and is the second installment in the Apocalypse trilogy. A research team finds a mysterious cylinder in a deserted church. If opened, it could mean the end of the world. Kind of an interesting plot. Can't say I completely understood it though, and then the end just felt anticlimactic, which is a shame. Number 188, In the Mouth of Madness, a 1994 American horror film directed by John Carpenter and written by Michael DeLuca, and is the third installment in the Apocalypse trilogy. An insurance investigator begins discovering that the impact a horror writer's books have on his fans is more than inspirational. I've seen Sam Neill play a lot of bonkers roles during October, and while this is another one with a story I found quite hard to follow, I once again have to admire the performance because he sells the shit out of it. I think I can officially say the Apocalypse trilogy is not for me. Number 189, The Thing, is a 2011 science fiction horror film directed by, you know what, I'm just going to put the name on the screen because I can't pronounce it, and written by Eric Heiser, and is the prequel to the 1982 film of the same name. It tells the story of a team of Norwegian and American scientists who discover a parasitic alien buried deep in the ice of Antarctica, realizing too late that it is still alive. This in no way needed to be made. No reason at all. Good on them for lining some of the things introduced in the original to this film, but here's the thing. A prequel should expand and explain things we don't know. This film doesn't do that. What it does is show us everything we already saw or figured out in the first film just from the characters wandering around the area. It's not rocket science. That film told us everything we needed to know. This film did not do anything other than showing it on screen, which, as I said, we didn't need. The overuse of CGI ruins the film and takes away from what makes the original so good, which is its incredible use of practical effects. It's not as impressive when it's all done on a computer. Too much happens too often and too soon, and the use of the alien spaceship is just trying too hard. The film becomes boring fast, it's too over the top, and it doesn't need to be. I think this film makes some highly unnecessary writing choices that create terrible continuity issues and is very inaccurate to the decade, like including American characters on a Norwegian base and having female characters. It's nice and all to have a female protagonist, but it seemed as though it was done just because they wanted to represent more women and not because it made sense to the story. I find it hard to believe there would have been women stationed at such a base in the 80s, and I find it even harder to believe they'd recruit a female scientist for help. While I'm all for writing more roles for women, you have to be faithful to the source and the time period, and this was definitely not that. On top of that, numerous times the characters are seen using items that just did not exist in the 80s. Another problem is the end shown during the credits, which is meant to be the start of the first film, doesn't quite line up as well as they hoped. In this film, all the dogs are killed first, none of which were huskies, which is dumb. So at this point, it couldn't have taken the form of a dog and escaped. Because it was focusing on our female lead, it ignored the story of what was going on with two other characters, so we don't really know what was happening with them. Add to that, the two characters at the start of The Thing had grenades on board their helicopter, which they were trying to use. During the credits, only one character knows about The Thing, the other doesn't, and he never loads grenades onto the helicopter, and there would be no need for a helicopter to have any. Also, in the original, both characters were trying to kill the dog, but as I just said, thanks to the credits scene, this film establishes that only one character even knows what the dog is, so the continuity isn't good. Also, terrible characters with very little about them established, not even everyone's roles at the base. Bad film. Number 190, The Toy Box, and I'm losing my voice. A 2018 American supernatural horror film directed by Tom Nagel and written by Tom Nagel, Jeff Denton, Jeff Miller, and Brian Nagel. An estranged family take a trip to the desert in their used RV, but become stranded and isolated in the scorching terrain. They soon learn their RV holds terrible haunting secrets, and it starts killing them off one by one. Kind of fun and interesting at times, and the performances were a tad underwhelming and the story a bit too out there and didn't get rounded off all that well. I like the premise very much, I just felt they could have explored the history of the toy box and its owner a lot better. Number 191, Treehouse, a 2014 American horror film directed by Michael Bartlett and written by Alex Child and Miles Harrington. A teenage boy discovers the perpetrators of several brutal kidnappings in his hometown. This is another case of great premise, poor execution. I love that there's this small town and kids are going missing, and it seems like there are monsters in the woods, but it's later revealed that's not exactly the case. The problem with that is they didn't go all the way with the reveal, and the people playing the monsters were terrible. They weren't imposing or threatening or even coming off as intelligent for that matter. Instead, they came off as stupid, opportunistic killers, and that counteracts what was established earlier. I wish they had revealed better the who, and I would have liked a why, because we never got that, and then the final scene was just pushing it. But the performances of our main characters I did actually like. Didn't think the flashbacks were necessary though, but at least this film has character development, which a lot of films I've watched lately have not had. Number 192, Thambad, a 2018 Indian Hindi language period horror film directed by Rahi Anil Bare and co-directed by Adesh Prasad, with a screenplay by Bravi Prasad, Mitish Shah and Anand Gandhi. A mythological story about a goddess who created the entire universe. The plot revolves around the consequences when humans build a temple for her firstborn. Really enjoyed this film. Great story that demonstrates everything I love about foreign horror films and foreign films in general. The way they have different ways of approaching the genre and the way they incorporate their culture and history into them is always so enriching. I highly recommend this one. Number 193, Under the Shadow, a 2016 internationally co-produced Persian language supernatural horror film written and directed by Babak Anbari in his full-length feature film debut. A mother and daughter are haunted by a mysterious evil in 1980s Tehran during the War of the Cities. I say this a lot, but quite an interesting film with some terrific performances to say the least. Most of the horror in this film comes from its depiction of daily life in war-torn Iran during the 80s. The film doesn't give as much attention to its supernatural storyline, and then it just ends. Both of those aspects are quite disappointing, but its depiction of culture in that part of the world and that time period made it so interesting. Had it put more effort into the paranormal aspect, it would have taken it to a whole other level. Number 194, Unearthed, a 2007 American horror film written and directed by Matthew Luttweiler. An unknown creature terrorizes an archaeological dig in the middle of a desolate New Mexico town. Unearthed is Alien meets The Thing meets Native Americans, which is an odd combination. There were elements of the story I liked and elements I didn't. For example, I love the character of our sheriff, and while I appreciate her character development, I didn't feel her storyline added anything to the overall storyline and made it seem disjointed. A solid effort, but it needed more. Number 195, Vampires, also known as John Carpenter's Vampires, a 1998 American independent neo-western action horror film directed by John Carpenter, with a screenplay by Don Jacoby based on the 1990 horror novel Vampires by John Steakley. Recovering from an ambush that killed his entire team, a vengeful vampire slayer must retrieve an ancient Catholic relic that, should it be acquired by vampires, will allow them to walk in sunlight. I am super surprised by how many John Carpenter films I've ended up watching during October. From them I've learned John Carpenter films are very hit or miss with me. Some I love, some I don't. This one I very much enjoyed, and I think it's the first film I've ever seen Daniel Baldwin in. It's got vampires, Roman Catholic conspiracies, betrayal, modern day vampire hunters, and guys with attitude. Overall, it's a ton of fun. Number 196, The Vanishing, previously titled Keepers, a 2019 Scottish psychological thriller film directed by Christopher Nyholm and written by Celine Jones and Joe Bone. Three lighthouse keepers on the remote Flannan Isles find a hidden trunk of gold leading to their mysterious disappearance. Well, it's another film about lighthouse keepers going mad, the second one of its nature I've watched this month, and that's not even including the one everybody was talking about at the time. Compared to the other film I watched last month, I like this much more, but when you get down to it, it's all the same story told in different ways, and at least for me, once you've seen one mad lighthouse keeper, you've seen them all. No wonder they don't have lighthouse keepers these days. Number 197, The Wailing, also known as Gokseong, a 2016 South Korean supernatural psychological mystery horror film written and directed by Na Hong Jin. It's about a policeman who investigates a series of mysterious killings and illnesses. Quite enjoy this, but it's psychological for sure, but not in the way I'm used to. The first part of the film feels like a comedy and had me laughing several times as the characters and dialogue are very funny. And then the story becomes not so funny. It turns serious, and then I'm spending an hour trying to figure out who is the evil, and even by the end, I still wasn't sure what had happened, and I wasn't sure why it took 2 hours to tell this story, or why there had to be so much back and forth. It just felt too much. Nevertheless, it's still a great film. Number 198, The Ward, a 2010 American supernatural psychological horror film directed by John Carpenter and written by Michael and Sean Rasmussen. Set in 1966, the film chronicles a young woman who is institutionalized after setting fire to a house and who finds herself haunted by the ghost of a former inmate at the psychiatric ward. I was halfway into this film before I realized I'd already seen it, which I suppose demonstrates that the film isn't memorable. It's a decent enough film and I do like the characters, just didn't enjoy the conclusion. The film goes to such great lengths of creating this supernatural element to it and to weave the characters together in such a way that to turn around and reveal what they did seems kind of lazy, not to mention without even paying attention, you can see the twist coming. Number 199, The Wicker Man, a 1973 British horror film directed by Robin Hardy with a screenplay by Anthony Shaffer based on David Pinner's 1967 novel Ritual. A police sergeant is sent to a Scottish island village in search of a missing girl who the townsfolk claim never existed. Stranger still are the rites that take place there. There was a lot to unwrap with this film, and to say I found it triggering is an understatement. I will first just say how this film isn't classified as a musical is beyond me because there is an awful lot of singing in this film. That aside, The Wicker Man for me is a theological piece that depicts Christianity's view of alternative religions and the world's view of Christianity. No one religion is the right one and no religion is mandatory, yet our sergeant walks through this town insulting their beliefs, calling them heathens, and threatening them with legal action for not teaching children about Jesus and for not having churches or ministers. They speak about Immaculate Conception and he insults them and calls them insane, forgetting that Immaculate Conception is a key factor of his own religion. He belittles their beliefs at every turn, and while much of the film depicts real pagan rituals, many are dramatized to a level that matches that which has been perpetuated by Christians for centuries. By depicting any religion that dare not be Christian as barbaric, insane, sinful, and damned, these very present themes forced me to recall past memories of being treated the very same way, making this film a hard pill to swallow. But in that regard, it made me admire how raw the depiction was. There is something to be said in how the sergeant is the perfect blend of the pros and cons of Christianity as it is perceived by man. He is moral and trying simply to do what is right. He follows the law and scripture, but his beliefs are selective, as is with most people. He comes into another's world and does not show it or its people respect. He degrades it and tries to force his beliefs on the people of the village, ignoring the Bible's own teachings. Judge not that ye be not judged, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. Even with all this, the people of the village never question or insult his beliefs, never force their beliefs upon him, not counting the sacrificing part. Even several times offering him to simply ignore it and walk away, but he doesn't. And even at the very end, as he praises and pleads to his God, they respect him and admire him holding true to his belief as they to theirs. There is so much to take away from this film, and it spoke to me very much. Fantastic film, and I could go on, but that would end up a full-length review. Number 200, The Wicker Man, a 2006 American-Canadian mystery drama thriller film directed by Neil LaBute, with a screenplay by LaBute. It's a remake of the 1973 British film, but also draws from the original source material. A sheriff investigating the disappearance of a young girl from a small island discovers there's a larger mystery to solve among the island's secretive neo-pagan community. I'll admit I don't hate it. It's well made after all with good performances, but it's soulless. It replicates scenes and dialogue from the first film, but puts them into entirely different contexts. The profound theological themes of the original film have been completely removed. The original demonstrated, albeit dramatized, very real religious practices. This, on the other hand, makes up a bunch of shit, turns a religious village into a cult, takes people living happy, relatively normal lives, and turns them into a sect of women who have created a backwards and mentally unhinged society where the women are the dominant and preferred gender and men are limited and forced to be subservient. One could look at that as a reverse dramatization of gender roles in today's society, but the insanity attached made it not feel that way. There just isn't much of anything to appreciate in terms of plot. Also, holy shit, did not remember James Franco being in this. Probably didn't know who he was then though, if I'm honest. Number 201, The Wicker Tree, a 2011 horror film written and directed by Robin Hardy, based on Hardy's 2006 novel Cowboys for Christ. It contains many direct parallels and allusions to the 1973 film and is contended as a companion piece. Charmed by the residents of Tressock, Scotland, two young missionaries accept the invitation to participate in a local festival, fully unaware of the consequences of their decision. This was not good. For starters, we all know of missionaries going to underprivileged countries, but Scotland? They got 1,500 parishes. They don't need missionaries. Now, some of what is mentioned in this film regarding the people's faith, talking about Sulis and Minerva, this is all true. Sulis was a deity worshipped in Somerset, which is in southwest England. You can easily look that up. Despite having the same director, while this film does have parallels, they are not remotely the same quality. His film, which is based on his own book, is atrocious compared to his last film that was based on someone else's novel. That film had strong themes and depicting both pros and cons of religion. I didn't feel that it made fun of either religion, as it demonstrated Christianity's view of alternative faiths and the world's view of Christianity, so it felt honest in those takes. But this just felt like it was taking the piss out of religion in general, and I'm surprised Christopher Lee agreed to make an appearance. The performances aren't good, the accents are terrible, it is insulting to Christians and insulting to pagans. Pagans are being written as cannibals laughing at Christians, and Christians are being written as dim-witted morons who are fake and don't know anything about the religion they preach. Okay, that happens with some people, but not most. Nothing felt honest or respectful. This film has some lines near identical to The Wicker Man and has the same use of songs with sexually metaphorical lyrics throughout the film. It's a copy of the first in many ways, but it's also a polar opposite, at least in terms of quality. One word to describe this film would be egotistical. It wasn't enjoyable and was making me both bored and angry. Number 202, You Might Be the Killer, a 2018 American meta-supernatural slasher film directed by Brett Simmons and written by Simmons, Kovis, Berzoni, and Thomas P. Vital. A camp counselor suffering from blackouts finds himself surrounded by murder victims. He turns to his horror movie enthusiast friend for advice and to contend with the idea he may be the killer. So this was awesome. I honestly really enjoy horror films of this nature, the kind that take a meta approach to their storytelling. On top of having a fun and wild story, it feels like a tribute to horror. They all do. It's dissecting, analyzing, and replicating tropes and formulas featured in thousands of horror films over the decade. It's extra fun when they start listing many of them. You start checking off if you've seen them, but then you start thinking of the things they discuss and try to pinpoint what other films you've seen it in. It's fun, funny, a bit campy, and just an overall blast. I plan to watch this again very soon. Only con was that I didn't necessarily like how it ended. Number 203, You Will Like My Mother, a 1972 American horror thriller film directed by Lamont Johnson and written by Joe Hyams, based on Naomi H. Hence's novel of the same name. The film follows a pregnant widow who travels from Los Angeles to rural Minnesota to meet her mother-in-law, who she comes to find out has sinister motives against her. Nice little 70s thriller film. I enjoyed watching this and getting to see where the story was going and how it all played out, and I've got to say it played out very nicely with an ending I'd have no other way. Number 204, Zipperface, a 1992 American erotic slasher film directed by Mansoir Permont with a screenplay by Barbara Bishop from a story by Permont. Lisa Ryder is a young policewoman recently promoted to detective when she has her first case in tracking down and identifying a serial killer in her small California town. I honestly thought I'd hate this and think it was shit. It actually wasn't bad. I mean, it's a total B horror movie, and so you need to accept it as such. But as such, it nailed it. It says erotic slasher, and sure, there are sexual themes, but I still wouldn't go as far as to call this an erotic slasher. It was kind of well filmed and the performances were rather decent, all things considered. I think what I loved most about this is how it drops all these hints that all these different characters might be the killer to make you figure out which one it might be. It's silly and ridiculous and everything you'd expect from a B movie, so I'd say it was a pretty good film. And last but not least, number 205, Zombie High, also known as The School That Ate My Brain, a 1987 comedy horror film directed by Ron Link and written by Tim Doyle, Aziz Ghazal, and Elizabeth Passarelli. A beautiful young teenager must fight against a boarding school that is intent on turning everyone into Stepford-esque perfect students. This was a pretty fun film, and despite its title, is not at all about The Walking Dead, thank God. Great performances, an interesting story with backstory and some good character development. Not for everyone, but for who does get it, it's good stuff. It really is like the Stepford Wives, only it's teenagers and a prep school. Good way to end my 31 days of Halloween. And I am so relieved that I have finally finished recording all of my recaps. I'm really proud of myself. Pat myself on the back. I did it. Even if these videos only get like 5 views, I'm just proud of myself for deciding to do something and sticking with it. When it comes to me doing YouTube or little projects like these, I find it really hard to motivate myself and keep up that momentum, and I sometimes tend to back out on myself. If I make a plan with somebody else, I stick to it, but with myself I'm like, nah, never mind. So I have accomplished something today. As I've said in each of my videos, please comment down below and let me know if you have seen any of the films I talked about in this recap video. If you have, let me know what you thought of them and tell me which films you have never ever heard of and may or may not check out. But it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, so I think I'm gonna jump into bed. Thank you to everyone who watched this video and watches my other videos. Thank you as always to my amazing patrons, and until next time, bye!